Hi out there in Radio Land. My name is Tank Nelson. The show is called Saturday Night at the Movies. Well, let's say it was called Saturday Night at the Movies. Last night at dinner with my producer, we chatted about it and decided to change the name to broaden the scope. And in kicking it around, we came up with the name Let's Talk. That's what we do. It's certainly fitting. And it'll allow for some reach. Well, I hope it allows for some reach. Now I'm going to back up to back this meal again. I say we were out to dinner. My producer's name is Drew. We're having dinner at Big Sky in downtown San Luis Obispo. Really interesting place. The help is excellent. The room is big. We settle in and we start to talk. Well, the waitress came by and said, "Would we like to order?" Well, we have a glass of wine. And we talk some more. And a nice thing, she says, when you're ready, stand the menu up so I can see it. So we knew there's a signal involved. Well, the talk centered around the first two shows that were called, as I said, Saturday Night at the Movies and Movie Talk. We went from there where the possibilities are. And, of course, I love possibilities, so we went on and on and on. Well, the menu laid on the counter, and the lady, very, very charming waitress came by several times, and she didn't ask anymore. She just kind of looked, and I'd smile, and she'd smile, and she'd go on her way. Well, we had to order. So we opened the menu, and I was going to have something with noodles, a soup kind of thing, but Drew looked down, and he saw lamb shanks. I didn't see it. He said, "I'm going to have the lamb shank." Well, I'm from way back. I'm a big fan of lamb shanks, so I switched my order over. Well, we talk some more, we laugh some more, and here comes the meal. Oh, of course, there was a soup and a salad and a lot of fun play over a split pea soup. But that's a long story, we won't go into that. But the two of us sitting there having this just a fantastic meal. I mean, meat that falls off the bone, and I compared it to polenta, something that it sits on. And because of the sauce and the meat and the flavorings that went down through this, whatever it was, it just made it excellent. So here's two guys shooting the breeze, thinking about the future, discussing a radio show. Now, I've always loved the show business. I mean, the entertainment business, show business, whatever you want to call it. I've had a thing for it since I went to my first movie. And here we are talking, and I still find this quite amazing, that we're talking about a radio show that we've already done two shows. We're going to do the third the next day. And if all goes well, we'll do a lot of shows. Well, that conversation, a glass of wine, good talk, good food, and the potential for the future. I went home from there. I live in Morro Bay, and I drove back into a gorgeous sunset, not on pins and needles or, some jacked up excitement, but a sense of pleasure of being able to do something, well, that I'd like to do, that I was fascinated with doing, and that there's a possible audience. I mean, you can do a lot of stuff, but without an audience, there's not much reaction. So to have all that, to have this microphone in front of me, to have a room full of equipment that's going to put it all together and give it to you, that's a pretty cool thing. Well, in this talk with Drew, something came up that of the first two shows that they were fast and furious. I mean, I was talking about movies. I know a little bit about movies, and we were talking about movies, and the show would be over, and I'd go home, and then I'd listen to it later and did the second one the same way. What I realized, and what people that have heard the show have talked to me about, is that I didn't tell you who I am. I mean, I say I'm Tank Nelson. Who cares who Tank Nelson is? You don't know anything about Tank Nelson. So right now, it's a good time as any, I'll tell you a little bit about, in future shows I'll tell you more, but right now I'm going to tell you a little bit, a very short biography. I live in Morro Bay, married. My wife's name is Terry. We live in one of those cottage kind of houses up from the beach a little ways. Lovely place. Morro Bay is San Luis Obispo is a great downtown. And we come over often. We come over for the farmers market. We come over to go to the movies. We come over to eat. We come over to visit friends. We come here a lot. But Morro Bay, for a small town, and it is small compared to St. Louis, Morro Bay for a small town is just, I don't know if you can beat it. I don't know. I don't know. I've been up and down the coast a lot. I've never run across. I've run wonderful places. I mean, there are lots and lots of places that are fantastic. But for a small town, Morro Bay is outstanding. Well, that's now you know I live in Morro Bay. That's that part. Before we moved here 5 years ago. Before we moved here, this is the biography part. I was born and raised in San Pedro, California, which is the harbor of Los Angeles. My father, now this is a little big biography swing here. My father was a longshoreman way back. I mean, he was a charter member as a longshoreman, which in those days, but this is now we'll move it up to 1951. In 1951, fathers could sponsor sons or brothers into the union. My father sponsored me. Now, to get in, I want to get into chance a bit here because that's one of my favorite subjects. I have an older brother, Harry, 5 years older than I am. When the opportunity to become a longshoreman came up, my father asked my brother, because he was married and had 2 children already. My brother turned it down because he had a nice job and longshoring was kind of a rough, dirty job. He turned him down. So I'm the only other son. The chief was what we called my father. The chief comes to me and he says, "Hey, you want to be a longshoreman?" I'm 18 years old. I'm in high school. I'm dumb as a stick. And I'm standing there and I hate the idea, but I'm sure that I shrugged my shoulders and said, I guess. I can't even picture how dumb that is today, but I think that's what happened. So he told me what to do. I went over and did it. I became a longshoreman. Now, there are many stories in between, but I was a working longshoreman for 44 years. I've been retired I'm 73 years old. I've been retired for quite a few years. But that's my background. I'm going to sit here on the radio and talk to you, and I hope it's fun and interesting for you. But if you want to know who's talking to you, that's part of the story. But now, because we started with movies, I guess I've got to get into that to give you a little bigger picture. While a longshoreman, while I'm doing this for a living, and I'm thinking I'm actually here sitting and laughing over the possibility of this even happening. This is one of those things. If somebody told you it happened, they say you ought to be nuts. I'm living in an apartment in San Pedro. The guy that owns my apartment house, I'm on the second floor, front on a street, and the guy that owns my apartment house goes away for a week. He comes. We all have breakfast in the same cafe. Him and his wife come back, and he sits down at the table one morning, and he says, "Listen, Tank, I'm sorry, I got it backed up. I went away for the week. I went away for the week. I come back, I sat down, and he says, "Listen, Tank, you can't go away anymore. You can't go on vacation." And I said, his name is Ed. I said, "Ed, why?" I'm laughing. "Why can't I go on vacation?" He said, "Nobody knows what movie to go to when you're gone." And I looked at him, and I'm not startled, but I was kind of thinking, why? Well, it turns out that at these breakfast meetings, I didn't even realize I was doing it. Every time I saw a movie, the next day I came in, that's what I was talking about. Saw this movie, blah, blah, it was this, it was that, it's a good one, it's a bad one, whatever it was. And so they became accustomed to me bringing in the information. Well, when he said, "You can't go away because we don't know what movie to go to," and we laughed over it. He says, "You know what you ought to do?" That's what you ought to do. Well, he's my landlord. He can tell me what. He says, "You ought to hang a blackboard out your window and tell people what movie to go to." And of course, I laughed, he laughed, the table laughed. Well, that afternoon I went to the hardware store, bought a blackboard, put a little string through it. I mean, this sounds so corny, so outrageously corny, but it is true. Got a little 2 feet by 3 feet, whatever it was. And whatever movie I'd seen that week, I wrote it on the blackboard, put a couple nails in the window. Of course, it's his building. I put nails in the windowsill. Put the nails in the windowsill, hung the blackboard out the window. Now, to this day, I still am fascinated by what happened. People walking by, people driving by, started watching the blackboard. I went to movies a lot. I surely changed it every week. But people would holler up to me at the window saying, "Was it really that good?" Well, that kind of thing. People would drive by and honk their horn and give me the thumbs up. And, they give me some other things too, but we won't go into that. But this thing hangs out there for, I don't know, months. Let's call it months, because I don't remember. It hung out there for months. One day, there's a knock at my door downstairs, and I live by myself. I'm sitting at my desk. I holler, "Come on up!" Well, this guy comes up. You have to make a 90-degree turn to get in the room I'm sitting in. I can hear him come up the stairs. He turns, and here's this young guy standing there. I didn't know him from Adam. I says, "Hi." He says, "Hi." I says, "What can I do for you?" He says, "Well, I work for the local paper, the News Pilot, which I'd read all my life." He says, "I work for the News Pilot." I says, "Yeah." He says, "I keep seeing your sign outside." And I said, "Well, yeah." Well, you can imagine this conversation. I'm a little dumbfounded. This guy's standing there, and he says, "I'd like to do a story about it." I said, "What kind of, what do you mean, the story?" He said, "Well, I'd like to tell everybody's interested in your blackboard." And I'm telling you, I had very little knowledge that it was this interesting. I mean, I thought it was fun. It was interesting, that kind of, but not a big deal. I said, "Well, sure, you want to do that?" So we sit down. Now, this young guy, his name is Robert Bobbage. We sit down, and he says, and I basically told him the story I just told you in some broader form. But as Bob is sitting there, he's looking around my apartment. Now, I would say, well, how would I describe? My apartment would be unusual in the fact that I wrote on the walls whenever I wanted to remember something, or I wanted to investigate something. Instead of putting it in a paper and getting it in a stack and forgetting about it, I would take a big felt pen and go and write it on somewhere on the wall. So the walls are all covered with these things. And of course, I don't think most people get to write on their walls. And this Bob would look around, and he was talking and he was listening, but he was also doing this thing. Well, there was a big sign in the hallway, and it said, "Cribbage lessons, $20, free if you bring dinner." Well, he never played cribbage now, and he'd heard about it, so he asked me to explain cribbage to him. Now, this conversation goes on for quite a period of time. Finally, he says, "Could I use your phone and call my editor?" I got up. He sat down at my desk, picked the phone. He calls the editor. And they talked for a while, and he held the receipt. You know how you hold your hand over it. He says, "Could we have a photographer come out here?" I said, "Well, sure, I don't care." And so that afternoon, a photographer shows up, takes these pictures. He takes pictures I'm just sitting there, flash things are going, whatever. He leaves. Well, 2 days later, in the front page of a newspaper I'd read all my life, here's a big colored photograph and a story about the blackboard. Well, it was so much fun. Can you imagine walking up to the things where you buy the papers at a newsstand, and you look down, and there's your picture, and there's a story about you, a guy that's a longshoreman. Just a guy. That's all I am. I'm a guy. And here's this front page story about this guy because of a blackboard. Now, I can't tell you how much fun this is, but it is big time fun. Now, there's the newspaper. Okay. There is a follow-up story, in that the Academy Awards were soon after that. And I will go on and on. But this column led to me reviewing movies on television, on radio, NPR radio, local radio there in LA, even got me a job on the radio. This is 10 or 15 years ago. It was a fabulous run, and it all started with this little blackboard. Can you imagine? A longshoreman, which is just a blue-collar working guy, turns into a front page, turns into a reviewer, and things are going along swell. I'm just, like I said, I'm having the time of my life. The editor of the paper calls me up. I got to put something in front of that. The editor had asked me if I ever felt like it, he'd like me to write something about the experience of having the front page article. Then I got another article, and then there was a big article in the LA Times that spins off the Academy Awards, but that's in the backstory. But so there was a big splash, and he asked me and I said yes, like a 10-year-old kid would tell, yes, I'll do my homework. Nothing happened. Time passed. There's stories on top of stories. We'll get into that eventually down the road. If we're here, I'll probably tell you more stories than your ears can handle. But in this case, I was in my office, and I got a call on the telephone. And the call was from Joan Rivers in New York, and they wanted this longshoreman movie reviewer to come back and sit down with other movie reviewers on her show and discuss movie reviewing. Now, again, I'm talking about a local guy, a longshoreman that never, I was going to live a very easy, normal life and all this stuff is now mushrooming. Well, I do go to New York. and it was as joyous a time as I could ever. And somewhere down the line, I'll tell you the story of New York because it is lots of fun. But it happens. I come back. Now at the time when I got back, it only took a day and a half. When I come back at this period of my life, I'm working on a book, and how this is done, because I'm not much of a speller and I certainly don't use the English language on paper very well. But I was dictating the book to a person, and they would come every day, sit down, turn on their tape recorder, and I would tell them chapter 1, chapter 2, whatever we're doing. Well, this day, Charlie comes, he sits down, and I says, Charlie, we're not going to work today. I says, I'm so high from this trip that I don't know what day it is. And as we're doing this, as we're talking, he says, well, tell me about it. And of course, it just happened. So I start off, well, like I'm doing here. I start off, and I just rambled about this story, about how they picked me up with the limo, the airport, the this, the that, the whole thing, New York, what happened, why it happened. I'm just rattling. So he's after a period of time, he smiled, I smiled, and I says, we'll work again tomorrow. Well, he goes back to his place, but unbeknownst to me, at fate, luck, whatever you want to call it, and we'll talk about luck a lot on this show if you hang around and I hang around. There'll be a lot of luck talked about. He goes back to his place, and like I said, I didn't know the recorder had been on. So he comes back about 2 hours later and hears this story. He was very good on paper. Periods, commas, paragraphs. Charlie was really good. So he comes back and he hands it to me. He says, I thought you might like this. I read it. I mean, it was exactly what happened. But here it is all on paper with commas and periods. I mean, it was like, this was really cool. And I thanked him and whatever. And I told him I had mentioned a bonus because I was paying him. I had it. Then I thought, well, maybe I'll give this. Philip Sanfield was my editor. I thought maybe I'll give this to Philip to kind of cover my obligation for telling what happened. So I called him up and I invited him to lunch. We went to a place called Auntie's, an old Slavonian restaurant in Pedros. Very nice place, one of my favorites. We go there for lunch. We're chit-chatting back and forth. And I says, Philip, I have this thing. Maybe you'd like it. We were talking about what happened because I was in the paper. And of course, I must have told him thank you 1,000 times for running the thing because it changed everything. Well, it changed a lot. I don't know about everything. It changed a lot. I handed it to him. He says, thank you. And he put it in. He had a little, like a manila folder. He put it in there and we chatted some more and off he goes. I went home to my place. Next day, well, actually, 2 days later. 2 days later, inside of the front page, in the middle, is a big block piece of writing, and it's the story. He prints it in the paper. And he just tells his story. But, Tank Nelson, but there's a little headline. It was like Tank Nelson goes to New York, and that was the story. And I'm thinking, wow. So, I'm reading it, and I got about 3 phone calls very early in the day, people talking about it. It's creating, as they say, it's creating a buzz. Lots of fun. And I thought, well, that was interesting. That was another little niche in the game. Well, let's call it another couple days later. Philip calls me, and he says, Tank, would you like to write a newspaper column for us? If my English teachers would have heard him, they'd have rolled over in their grave. And I said, what? He says, we'd like you to write a newspaper column. I said, what about? He said, you can write about anything you want. I said, anything I want. He said, what do you think? And I said, well, let me get back to you. So I hung up the phone. Now I'm sitting there, a kid that barely got out of high school. I've been in the Navy, longshoring, that type of thing. But I had no background for writing. I mean, well, that's another part of it. But no, let's say it. You wouldn't think that I could possibly do this. I didn't think I could possibly do this. Then the light turned on, the epiphany, whatever you want to call it. My daughter, Polly, is not only a writer, but an editor. And there's again, another long story, and we'll probably talk about that down the line somewhere. But she's this. She lives in Utah. I get on the phone, I call her. I said, Polly, I just had this offer. I could hear her chuckling on the other side. She knows the same thing I know. And so we're talking, and I says, is it possible that if I wrote the stuff down, that if I write clearly and don't scribble too much, if I write it down, if I send it to you, could you put all the stuff that makes it readable and send it to the news pilot? she said, we don't have to do that. And I, of course, I didn't, I said, what? He says, you write it down and call me and read it to me. I'll take it down on this end. Now, what a dunce I am. I didn't even, I didn't realize that she was that good or that could even, I've seen stenographers and all that type of thing, but I'd never been involved with it. How would I know? I says, you mean I can just call you up and read? She says, sometimes you might have to slow down a little bit or I might have to tell you to wait. But I said, sure, we can do that. So I said, oh, okay. So I call Philip back up. I said, Philip, I'll write your column for you. He says, great. When can I have the first one? I says, well, give me a deadline. And he did. So I sat at my desk. Now, remember this out of the blue. This starts with the blackboard hounded thing, the whole thing. I said, okay. I don't even remember what the first column was about. But I wrote it. I don't know how long it took. Days went back and over. I had time, and I kept fooling with it. Called it to Polly. She does it, and she sends it down. Now, he prints it. Well, lo and behold, people wrote letters to the editor. People called, and they said, geez, we know him or we don't or this and that. It was interesting, whatever they said. That was 13 years ago. I still write the column. I live in Morro Bay now, and I write it for it's for the Daily Breeze in Torrance. It used to be for the News Pilot in San Pedro, but they absorbed the paper because they were the parent. But now I write for the Daily Breeze, and it's all about, not all about, but it covers a big range of things, but it's mostly centered there. Like this program, this radio program that I'm doing here, will be mostly centered on the Central Coast. But that's it wasn't a long story. It's 20 minutes. But it's about 20 minutes of what we're going to try. We're going to call the show Let's Talk. It's going to be on, I'm going to read it because I probably say it backwards if I didn't read it. 1340 KYNS. That's where you're going to hear me. Now, I've given you a bit of biography. On a coming show where there won't be so much biography, there'll be a subject, I guess, or a couple of subjects, and we'll fly and wing it and all. And we're even going to have somewhere next week, the week after, we're going to have guests. I didn't realize that all we needed was another microphone. Drew says, yeah, we can put another chair, another microphone, sit there and shoot the breeze, talk about anything you want, and let's see how it goes. Well, anyway, the show's going to be called Let's Talk. I'll give you my email address in case you want to say, whatever you want to say. My email address is Tank Nelson, one word, tanknelson@earthlink.net. I'll do it one more time because I talk a little fast. One word, tanknelson@earthlink.net. You can put anything you want there. I'll get it. If it's interesting, if it's fun, we'll come back and we'll talk about it on the air. The station, 1340 KYNS, that's where we're talking from now. But if you want to contact me through that, you just add .com, 1340 KYNS.com. That'll lead you to all kinds of stuff. So you have ways of getting in touch. You've heard my story. You know the program's going to be about talking, and we're going to hopefully, and again, this is only our third show. I'm going to assume, this is a jump in optimism, but I'm an optimistic guy. I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of shows, which means there's going to be a lot to talk about. If I get feedback from you out there, we'll work off that. If I read the paper every day, we'll work off that. I read a series of magazines because I like them. We'll work off that. Now, there's even a book now and then that we'll get involved in. But I'm also a movie guy. And so, television too. There's lots of good stuff on television. Not all good stuff by a long ways, but there's lots of good stuff. Like The West Wing was a wonderful show, and I'm sorry it's gone, but I still watch reruns and really enjoy them. Well, we might even talk about The West Wing, even though it's gone. It was one of the great shows. You can buy the DVDs, and that's going to be something we'll be doing too. But it's going to be about talk. I think we're going to have fun. I think it's going to be interesting. Drew will be here. I will be here. We'll have guests. I give you the addresses. Oh, now this is new for me, this radio thing. So particularly toward the end of the show, I start rambling a little. That's all right. There's going to be music come up. Well, the old cover. We'll have music come up. We'll start with some music probably. We'll end with music. But we'll be back at 7:34 on Saturday nights. And, we ought to have a great time. I'll see you then.